Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here today. My name is Sammy. I'm Congresswoman Underwood's Community Liaison. This training is being interpreted in Spanish. Si usted quisiera escuchar la capacitación en español, puede oprimir Interpretation abajo de su pantalla y después oprime Español. Para solo oír la versión interpretada y no las dos versiones, puede hacer clic en Mute Original Audio. Unfortunately, Congresswoman Underwood will not be able to join us live today, but she wanted to share a few words with you all, and we'll play a video in just a moment. For everyone's awareness, this training is being recorded and will be posted later on the Congresswoman's YouTube page. After the Congresswoman's remarks, we'll hear from Colleen, Executive Director of ACLU Illinois. She'll take questions following the presentation, but we ask that you please wait until the presentation is complete before submitting them in the Q&A feature in case she covers your question during the presentation. Please be aware that this event is for general information purposes only and does not constitute legal advice. If you need legal advice, please contact an attorney. A reminder, if you're just joining now, this presentation is being interpreted in Spanish. Si usted quisiera escuchar la capacitación en español, puede oprimir Interpretation abajo de su pantalla y después oprime Español. Para solo oír la versión interpretada y no las dos versiones, puede hacer clic en Mute Original Audio. Without further ado, here is Congresswoman Lauren Underwood.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you all for being here today, and thank you to the ACLU of Illinois and Colleen Connell for your partnership on today's event. In a few minutes, I will turn it over to Colleen, who has prepared a Know Your Rights presentation and will share best practices for bystanders. For those of you who I haven't met, I'm Congresswoman Lauren Underwood, and I have the honor of representing Illinois' 14th District in Congress. Our district stretches from DeKalb in the north all the way down to Ottawa and Utica, with Joliet and Aurora in the east, all the way out west to Spring Valley. In Washington, D.C., I serve as ranking member of the Homeland Security Appropriations Subcommittee. That means I'm the top Democrat in charge of managing their funding in the House of Representatives. It is also my job to do everything in my power to ensure that your constitutional rights are respected and our communities are safe. As an appropriator, as your Congresswoman, and as your neighbor, I can tell you that the recent activities of federal agents that I've seen in our community are making us less safe. Just 2 weeks ago in Aurora, a constituent of mine was violently pepper sprayed without any apparent justification. Our communities are being terrorized, brutalized, and illegally occupied by a president who wants to be a king, who is claiming in court that his actions are justified because, quote, Illinois is in a rebellion. Well, 2 weeks ago, a federal judge blocked his attempts to deploy the National Guard on our streets. But this administration, it seems, will stop at nothing to trample on the rule of law, because this isn't about safety, and it's definitely not about immigration enforcement. We know that because these actions are taking place without adequate coordination or communication with local law enforcement or elected officials, not with the Illinois State Police or our local police, leaving all of us in the dark about what is happening and why, and putting innocent lives at risk. These developments have understandably left many residents, regardless of citizenship status, anxious and afraid. For families who have lived here for generations, it feels like the character of their neighborhoods is changing overnight. Many of us feel a growing sense that our neighborhoods are being monitored more closely than ever before. For small business owners, it raises questions about whether their workers and customers will feel safe coming in. And for parents, it creates fear about what their children might see or experience on their way to school, at home, or with their friends. As your representative, I feel those same concerns. Right now, one of the most important things that we can do to keep our community safe is to understand the rights that protect us all under the United States Constitution. So I've been hosting a series of events and meetings in the district while I've been home for the past couple of weeks that focus on knowing and protecting our rights. Last week in Aurora, we heard from so many at our community forum about the deep sense of outrage, fear, and anxiety that the Trump administration is causing as they trample over our constitutional rights. Today's session is to make sure that you have the tools that will keep you and your community safe. We have some incredible partners and experts joining us who will share resources, and this session will be recorded and posted on my YouTube page if you want to revisit it or share it with others. We're going to cover the best practices for bystanders when we witness concerning or potentially unlawful interactions between immigration officials or the military and our neighbors. The Department of Homeland Security is tasked with protecting the American people, but that mission must always be carried out responsibly with the utmost respect for civil rights and the rule of law. We are 10 months into this administration, and we are all less safe than we were before. The actions of this administration have pushed us to an unprecedented and sobering moment. America is a democracy, not a dictatorship. And in a democracy, our government is supposed to serve the people, not rule over them. Trampling our rights does not make us safer. It makes us less free. You have the right to feel safe where you live. You have the right to ask questions when you see increased law enforcement or military presence. And you have every right to expect that your government will act in your best interests. Now, for those of you who joined today that lived in my congressional district, please keep in mind that my office is your office. And I really mean that. I want you to know that we're here to help you navigate federal agencies and get help with Medicare, Social Security, IRS cases, immigration services and support, and so much more. My staff is going to share information in the chat on constituent services and how to get support. If you have immigration questions, or if a loved one is in ICE custody or facing repatriation, please call my office at 630-549-2190. To respect the privacy of all individuals, we are unable to discuss specific cases on this call, but my staff is available to speak with you one-on-one. In the chat, my staff is also going to share ICE Form 60001. This form allows ICE to share case-specific information with a third party, like your elected representative. Since it can be difficult to complete the form after being taken into custody, you may consider adding this form to your family's preparedness plan. My office works every day to help families navigate complex federal systems, and we will do everything that we can to make sure that you are supported and informed. Our safety as a nation depends on trust. Trust that our government will protect our rights, not violate them. That trust must be earned and defended every single day. I will keep fighting to ensure that your voices are heard, your rights are respected, and your family is treated with dignity. Together, we can demand a government that reflects our values and serves the people it was created to protect. So thank you and take good care. And now I'm going to turn it over to Colleen Connell, Executive Director of ACLU Illinois.
Thank you so much, Congresswoman Underwood. That was an amazing introduction to this very important and serious topic. And I will say it is an honor to actually be asked by your office and you to present this Know Your Rights presentation. And I just want to echo a couple things that Congresswoman said and that Sammy said in the lead up to the Congresswoman's presentation. Please use the question and answer function. I'm really happy to answer any questions. And I want to also echo the very important caveat that the Congresswoman gave that I'm not going to be able to provide specific legal advice or talk about specific cases out of concern for legal issues, legal rights, and people's privacy. So with that introduction, I'm going to start with a presentation of Know Your Rights with respect to immigration and the recent activities by ICE, and also your very important rights as bystanders as we see this escalating enforcement action by ICE agents and other federal officers in our districts, in our neighborhoods, and in our communities. We've already done that disclaimer, so I'm gonna rush by that. And so I'm going to talk very briefly about basic federal and state legal rights of immigrants. Um, I'm going to then also talk about supportive workplaces, because I know that many of you are small business owners. Many of you may be the CEO or the manager of a company, and I think there are some very important things that we can do to support our coworkers. And then third, I want to talk about all of our rights as members of a community and as potential bystanders to actions by federal agents with respect to federal enforcement of immigration issues. So I want to start this presentation by focusing on the importance of your own personal safety. And I couldn't agree more with the Congresswoman. The Trump administration over the past 10 months, and particularly the enforcement activities of federal agents, has made us all less safe. And with that big picture, I want to say that even when you know your rights and you exercise them, police officers or ICE may not honor them. And it is never a good idea to use force or to physically resist police officers or ICE, even when you know that they are in the wrong and that you are in the right with respect to your understanding of your constitutional or legal rights. So elevate your personal safety. Um, Challenging governmental misconduct cannot be done oftentimes in the moment when you're, enduring the indignity or the violation of your rights. It can be done safely through legal and advocacy efforts after the fact. So play the long game. Um, Even if you know you're right, um, do not resist or physically use force against ICE officers. Um, just take a moment and comply and realize that there will be resources to help you fight after the fact. Um, Now, before we launch into the specifics of the rights, if you are in the unfortunate situation where you think police or ICE have violated your rights, or you're a bystander and think that enforcement agents are violating people's rights, write down everything you can remember as soon as possible, including any identifying information about the officers and their vehicles. If you are stopped while you're driving a car in violation of your rights, tell your lawyer or complain to the Congresswoman's office, or there's some additional legal resources that are presented at the end of the PowerPoint, which will be shared out. Finally, if you're injured, and I really hope that does not happen, seek medical attention and take photos of your injuries. So let's start with a basic primer of state and federal rights. Um, if you encounter ICE or other federal immigration enforcement agents, and we know that officers of Customs and Border Protection, or CBP, are present in these enforcement efforts. We also know that almost a quarter of FBI agents have been redeployed to immigration enforcement. And there are other federal officers, including officers with the Immigration and Naturalization Investigative Services, INIS, who are being deployed. So when I use ICE, I'm using that generically to describe a wide array of federal officers from different agencies. So if you encounter a federal officer on the street, really important to remember that you have the right to remain silent. If you do not have valid immigration documents, you have the right to remain silent about your immigration status or whether you have documents. If you do have valid immigration documents, you should show them when asked. The law requires immigrants who have been issued valid immigration documents, such as green cards, such as any documents that show that you've got a pending asylum case, or that you're a lawful permanent resident. Carry those documents, and if asked to show them, show them. I want to really emphasize that you should never show false or forged documents to any law enforcement officer or any governmental official. Showing false documents in and of itself is a crime that can either create or worsen any legal problems you might be facing because of your immigration status. So that is just a very easy thing to remember. Never show false or forged documents. Um, if you're a U.S. citizen, um, state that. We are not required as U.S. citizens to carry documentation, but it is important to state that if you think that you are being detained falsely because people suspect that you are an immigrant or that you're undocumented. So, and this is a continuation of if you encounter ICE on the street and you are stopped, if you do not have immigration documents, such as a green card or a paper showing that you've sought asylum, but you have been present here in the United States for more than 2 consecutive years, it is a really good idea to carry documents that can demonstrate that. So, for example, if you have a if you have mortgage documents, if you have a copy of your apartment lease, um, if you're enrolled in school or community college, if you're employed and you have a pay stub, um, those kinds of documents can show that you've been present in the United States for more than 2 years. And the reason that this is important is that the Trump administration is claiming the authority to deport any undocumented immigrant without a hearing. And that's really key, without a hearing, so no legal process whatsoever, if the person has been in the country for less than 2 consecutive years. So carrying some kind of documentation that you've been here for more than 2 years is going to be a really important um, step in establishing that you have a right to a hearing before you can be summarily deported. And again, the reminder of never showing false or forged documents. So, if you are stopped, I want to talk a little bit about the Fourth Amendment to the Constitution, which says, and I've put the text on the PowerPoint, that a person has the right to be secure in their houses or apartments or person against unreasonable searches and seizures unless there's a warrant. Now, what that means essentially is that law enforcement cannot enter your home, they cannot enter your apartment um, without a warrant that describes with detail either who or what they are looking for. Um, and so that's a very, very important safeguard against federal agents, law enforcement agents, pursuing you or a loved one inside a home, office, or dwelling place. Now, the Fourth Amendment, very important to recognize that it says the rights of people. It doesn't say citizens, it says people. The Fourth Amendment protects everyone in this country, not just citizens, not just people with documented immigration status, but all people to be secure against unreasonable searches and seizures. And this is really important to remember. Um, it's also important to remember that the Fourth Amendment protections are strongest in places where you have a reasonable expectation of privacy, like your home and your apartment. And it's weakest in public places like parks and streets. So, as I just went over, law enforcement needs a warrant to execute a search or a seizure. And seizure is just 18th century language for detaining or arresting someone. In the context that we're talking about tonight, which is immigration, it's really important to distinguish between two different types of warrants. There's a judicial warrant and a non-judicial or administrative warrant. Now, a judicial warrant is a warrant that's actually been signed by a U.S. District Court judge or magistrate. And it is much more difficult to obtain um, than an administrative warrant. And it is a more powerful warrant, usually, with much greater legal effect than a non-judicial or administrative warrant. And you can see on the screen, this is a copy of an administrative warrant. And again, we'll make this PowerPoint available to you. Um, Another copy of an administrative warrant. And this is a copy of a judicial warrant. And so if hypothetically somebody, a federal law enforcement agent, were to come to your home and demand entry, um, you can say, I need to see a warrant. And what you want to look for is on the top of the warrant, a title that says United States District Court, and then there'll be the name of a case and a case number. And then very importantly, whoops, I scrolled down too far. You'll see the underscored areas needs to be signed by a federal judge. So playing this out, when ICE knocks on the door, ICE cannot enter your home without a judicial warrant or your consent. I'm going to come back to consent in a minute. That's really important. So do not let ICE into the home. Let's just say that this happens to me. I'm a US citizen. Somebody knocks on the door. I go to the door and they say, it's ICE, open up. And I'm going to say, why? And I'm going to say, I'm not going to open up the door unless you've got a warrant. My front door has got two side panels of windows, and I'd say, hold it up to the door. If the warrant is not signed by a judge, I'm going to say, I don't want to talk to you. I don't have to let you in. And that is a right that the Fourth Amendment protects, unless you consent. And if you consent, ICE will say you waived your right to have a judicial warrant. So again, to think very carefully, and I say this and stress this, recognizing that if this ever happens, it's hard sometimes to keep your calm in an extremely stressful moment like this. So feel free to print out the PowerPoints that'll be made available. There's some Know Your Rights information again throughout the PowerPoint and some numbers to call. So don't hesitate to use that if you can while under stress. Now, I want to go back to these administrative warrants. And say that ICE may arrest someone for immigration violations if, hypothetically speaking, they have a judicial or non-judicial arrest warrant. So it's an actual arrest warrant, or that they have reason to believe that the person that they're trying to detain is in the United States in violation of the law and it's important, two criteria, and is likely to escape before a warrant can be obtained for his or her arrest. Now, that's a very important restriction on ICE's ability to detain people, even people who may be in this country unlawfully. The ACLU of Illinois and our litigation partners, including the National Immigration Justice Center and the Illinois Coalition for Immigrant and Refugee Rights, sued ICE and the Department of Homeland Security during the first Trump administration and secured a legal settlement, which is called a consent decree, that actually says ICE cannot detain someone that they suspect of being in the country unlawfully unless they have a warrant or they have reason to believe that the person that they want to detain will flee before ICE has an opportunity to get a warrant for that person's arrest. So if you or someone you know has been arrested by ICE in the following six states, Illinois, Indiana, Wisconsin, Kentucky, Kansas, and Missouri, without a warrant and a reason to believe that the person is likely to flee, report that to the National Immigrant Justice Center. I put the website down below, and there's a special page for you to provide that information. And we will take that information back to the federal judge, who will, in many cases, order the release of a person that's been wrongfully detained. And we're back in front of that judge pretty frequently with evidence that ICE has violated this important court order. I want to briefly talk about the Illinois Trust Act, which is another source of protection for, for immigrants, and really, quite frankly, for all of us. The Illinois Trust Act, which was passed under the first Trump administration, forbids state and local police from enforcing federal civil immigration law. What that means is that state and local police cannot, one, ask a person if they are a citizen or ask about a person's immigration status. State and local police cannot stop, arrest, search, or keep someone in custody only because of their immigration status. State and local police cannot provide detention or housing in a jail or facility for ICE, nor can they assist ICE with enforcement operations of the type we've been discussing. The exception to the Trust Act is if there's a federal criminal warrant. And the Illinois Trust Act does allow state and local police to cooperate with federal authorities in enforcing a federal criminal warrant against immigrants. So if you believe that you or someone you know has been the victim of a violation of the Trust Act, if hypothetically speaking, you were to say a local police officer assisted ICE in detaining someone, report that violation to the Illinois Attorney General, Kwame Rule. That is the civil rights hotline of the AG's office, the Attorney General's office, and they do take those complaints very seriously. Okay, I'm going to stop real quickly and say we're going to move to the second topic that I wanted to give an overview on, and that's supportive workplaces. Because as I mentioned, I know that many of you are small business owners. You may be the executive director or the president of a company or the HR person, and you want to provide a supportive workplace for all of your employees and a safe workplace for all of your employees. And you recognize that, as the Congresswoman said, all of us are less safe now than we were 10 months ago. So here's the situation that we're going to spend a few minutes talking about. If ICE, hypothetically speaking, enters the workplace, what happens? What can you do? So again, this is going back to the Fourth Amendment, which also covers places of employment to some degree. Um, ICE may enter parts of the workplace that are open to the general public, and ICE can do that without a warrant. So let's just take an easy example, maybe of a restaurant. Um, ICE can access a the public part of the restaurant where patrons sit, order dinner, have dinner, without a warrant. And we have seen that happen a number of times in Chicago. ICE cannot enter places in the restaurant that are off limits by and large to the general public. So think about the kitchen area. Think about any storage closets or any storage rooms, or let's say the restaurant has a basement or an upstairs where there might be offices. Those are not places that are open to the general public. ICE cannot enter those private areas without a warrant or someone who has apparent authority consents. So, the second issue of apparent authority consent is a really important one. And even though the ACLU, as you likely guessed, um, has a lot of lawyers on staff, we recently did our own ACLU of Illinois workplace training about what happens if ICE or other federal enforcement agents show up and want to talk to people or want to search the ACLU offices. And the first thing we said to our colleagues is, um, you need to immediately call either Colleen, because I'm the head of the office, or Kevin, who is our legal director, because those are the only two people at the ACLU of Illinois who have authority to consent to it really essentially admit federal officers into not into the offices. So this is a really important concept, and I think every workplace should establish protocol of who do we call if law enforcement shows up. Um, and just in case many of you were waiting, the first people either Kevin or I would call would be our outstanding lawyers who advise us on this. So, um, now let's talk specifically about what ICE can do with respect to private areas of a workplace. Again, ICE may not search the private areas of the premises or seize the property of a private workplace without a judicial warrant describing the particular places to be searched and items to be seized, or again, consent. Now, I want to point out the word particular. The Fourth Amendment has what we call, as lawyers, a particularity requirement. The government cannot um, basically go on a fishing expedition and just get a warrant that says we want to search the ACLU offices at 180, or excuse me, 150 North Michigan, Suite 600, and then just come in and comb through the place. No, they have to have specifically denoted what they are actually looking for in terms of papers or things. They can't just search everything in the office. Now, I want to speak just really quickly about um, the public-private distinction, but in a little bit more detail. So yesterday I did a Know Your Rights presentation like this to a healthcare facility that has two locations in one of the Chicago neighborhoods. What's public and what's private came up in the questions and answers there. So public can often be that waiting area that we've all been in. You enter a healthcare facility or a doctor's office, and maybe the waiting room is a public area. Increasingly, a number of healthcare facilities in Chicago have begun saying this is a private space, posting that on the front door. You cannot enter without an appointment. Um, but let's just say they don't have that sign on the door. ICE can come in and say, we'd like to search the premises. The answer is no, not unless you have a warrant. And exam rooms, procedure rooms, um, the area where the computers with medical records are kept, all of those are private spaces and cannot be searched without a warrant or again, consent. Um, this is just, a few more details, again, talking about a warrant and the particularity requirement. There are a couple of other types of legal documents that will allow the government to search or inspect a workplace for records. Another one is a subpoena, and that requires production of records at a certain time and place, subject to a court challenge. So with a subpoena, unlike a warrant, you usually have an opportunity to fight in court over production of those records before you have to produce them. Sometimes in lieu of or in addition to a subpoena, you may get a court order, which again, like a subpoena or like a warrant, may prescribe both the documents and some actual conditions subject to court order or appeal. In the immigration context specifically, the government may want to do an I-9 inspection or audit. But there, under law, you're allowed at least 3 days to comply. Or again, consent is sort of the you get into the office free card if you're thinking about the monopoly metaphor. And so, be very careful and know that you need to tell or advise your employees or your colleagues about who has the authority to consent or not consent to these kinds of situations. So, a few other things to keep in mind when you think about how you can make your workplace supportive. Um, and again, this will sort of wrap up what I've been talking about for the last 5 minutes here. A supportive workplace really will have a policy designating private areas of the workplaces, and it'll also clearly mark and sometimes lock private areas. A supportive workplace will not consent to ICE entering private areas without a judicial warrant. Again, a supportive workplace will teach employees um, what their rights are and how to exercise their right to remain silent. And very much like the kind of preparation plans that we have urged families to make, we've also urged supportive workplaces to make a plan for ICE raids and to practice it like a fire drill. That's, like I said, what we did at our office a few weeks ago. That plan will include who to call, who has authority to consent, who examines documents and determines what they allow. And then again, a supportive workplace will document what happens. This is where I'm going to go all legal on you again and say, I want to be very clear that I am not telling folks not to talk to federal officers, and I am not telling folks to say to everybody else, don't talk to federal officers. Everyone has their own right to make decisions about whether to talk to federal officers. Um, but I am laying out the consequences and the importance of establishing authority and consent. Okay. Final subject before we turn to question and answers. And that's really your right as a bystander. And I want to underscore how important the rights of bystanders have become at now, I think, 5 weeks of Operation Midway Blitz, which is the enforcement effort that's underway in the state of Illinois. So again, your rights as a bystander. Under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution, you have the right to remain silent. And under the First Amendment to the Constitution, you have the right to document what is happening. Just don't get in the officer's way. When I say you have the right to document what is happening, you can do that with whatever tools you have available. If you have a cell phone, which most of us do, you can use the photo function, you can use the video function, you can use the note function to take notes. You can do it the old-fashioned way with a pen and pencil if you carry that around, or a pen and paper if you carry that around. Or you can use the record function of your cell phone and just talk into the cell phone about what you see happening. Or perhaps if you're using the video function, you can narrate what you see happening. Now, that is really important because we, meaning the lawyers at the ACLU and our litigation partners, have used the documentation of third parties in our lawsuits that have sought successfully to limit ICE's activities that violate the law. So, 2 weeks ago, the ACLU, along with legal clinics at Northwestern Law School and University of Chicago Law School, um, and a couple of other public interest lawsuits, law firms filed a lawsuit against the Department of Homeland Security, including ICE and Customs and Border Protection, for the abusive enforcement tactics that we claimed ICE was using against protesters, including protesters at the Broadview Detention Facility, against members of the press who were covering those protests, and against members of the clergy who were protesting in exercise of their First Amendment rights of, freedom of speech, but also their First Amendment rights to practice their religion freely. And the videos and photographs that the bystanders and the participants in those protests took and shared with us became essential evidence in our presentation to the federal judge, who entered a temporary restraining order, um, TRO for short, prohibiting ICE from using indiscriminate force against um, protesters, bystanders, press, clergy people, um, using pepper spray, using rubber bullets, using excessive force in tackling and detaining protesters. Um, and recently, um, both yesterday but also late last week, again relying on some of the video evidence that we had submitted, broadened her TRO to require ICE agents to wear body cameras, um, and holding them accountable for what she was concerned, presented real violations of her order. So what do you document? Um, it's all the things that you'll recall from, probably a high school English class of how to write an essay. It's really the who, what, where, and why. So basic data. What time, did this happen? What time did it end? To the extent that you can, um, what agencies were involved? Was it ICE? Was it Customs and Border Protection? Was it the U.S. Marshals? Was it the FBI, county sheriff, whatever? The name and number and badge numbers or descriptions of the officers involved. Another really important victory that we got in the TRO that I described a few minutes ago is that the judge, in response to our complaint that so many of the federal agents were masked and were not wearing either a badge number or a nameplate on their uniform, she required them to have that, some kind of alphanumeric identification on the exterior of their uniform, unless they customarily, in their role with the agency, always worked undercover. Again, document who was present and other witnesses that you can identify. If ICE presented any documents, identify those. If ICE seized stuff, to the extent that you can, list or catalog the items seized. And finally, and most importantly, if people were detained or arrested, how many, and to the extent that you can, who they were. Um, and then again, the narrative, who said what to whom, this has become really important because um, we charged in the lawsuit that I referenced earlier that ICE was using pepper spray and tear gas without warning people. ICE claims, well, to the best of their knowledge, warnings were given. Well, actually, all of the video evidence that was taken as things were unfolding shows that no warning was given. So this is really important. Who said what to whom? Was there a warning given? Who went where? What did they do? How long? What happened next? As much information as you can record. Finally, um, as you can see, lots of different resources. Um, if you take a video, send it to aclu.org, we have rights, or send it to the ACLU of Illinois. Uh, our website is the last one listed. Um, Illinois Coalition for Immigrant and Refugee Rights, ICER, has a great family support network with information about how you can, for example, prepare a family emergency preparedness plan, additional family support and resources. Both ICER and our colleagues and friends over at the National Immigration Justice Center can help you track a family member if you are in the unfortunate situation that you think a family member or friend has been detained by ICE. Um, Both ICER and NIJC are closely related to the ACLU, or closely connected to the ACLU, and we work back and forth together to try to get people the legal resources that they need. Likewise, the American Immigration Lawyers Association and the National Immigrant Law Center all have very important Know Your Right resources and guides. Or email us at the ACLU of Illinois. We do monitor that inbox, if not 24/7, probably 18 hours of every day, or go to our website. So I'm going to stop here and turn it over to Sam to start the question and answer period. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Colleen. We'll now open the floor for questions. If you have questions, please ask them using the Q&A feature below. Si usted tiene una pregunta, puede escribirla haciendo clic en QIA y yo la traduciré para Colleen. As a reminder, please be aware that this event is for general information purposes only and does not constitute legal advice. If you need legal advice, please contact an attorney. All right, so we already have some questions here. Is the Fourth Amendment still applicable since Noam versus Vasquez Perdomo allows racial profiling?
The answer is yes, it is. And unfortunate as that situation and Justice Kavanaugh's a concurring opinion was, I think it's really important to recognize that um, he was responding only in that case. And it, because of the fact that it was what we call the shadow docket, it does not have binding precedential effect. And in fact, the lawsuit that the ACLU of Illinois brought that I referenced earlier, the Casa Nava situation is alive and well and controlling here in Illinois. And it's also important to recognize, even though this seems like a legal technicality, that the Perdomo case was not a case that actually considered the full, what we call merits of the lawsuit out in California, but rather it was on an emergency motion or a part of the shadow docket um, of whether the court, the lower court's order could remain in effect that blocked certain of those enforcement techniques by ICE. We at the ACLU of Illinois strongly believe that the kind of racial profiling that Justice Kavanaugh described as quote unquote common sense offends the Constitution, the 14th Amendment's Equal Protection Clause and the equal protection component that's embodied in the Due Process Clause of the Fifth Amendment.
Um, do warrants say your name on them?
A warrant for an arrest does. It will say Colleen Connell or my initial if the person sometimes goes by another name, also known as, but yeah. If it's a warrant for a search of property, it will say the address of the location. If it's an apartment building, it should say the unit number. Um, And again, going back to what I said earlier, there is a particularity um, requirement of the Fourth Amendment that says we want to see documents, related to Colleen's immigration status, or we want to see documents related to Colleen's import-export business because we think that she's, um, basically trafficking people. It should say with some particularity. I do want to say that. That is how the Fourth Amendment is supposed to work. Unfortunately, we have been told that ICE, and we've actually documented it, so it's not just rumor, um, that ICE is carrying around blank warrants um, and is writing the names in of people after they've detained people and asked for identification, and is writing people's names in after the fact. Um, that is not acceptable under the case that I described, which is the Castanova case. But I want people to be aware of what's happening, and to, if you or someone you know has been detained under those circumstances, where ICE is sort of making it up or waiting until they made the arrest to fill in the warrant, we want to hear about that. And I also think, it's really important just to do our own reality check and, say out loud what is happening, which is that ICE is playing fast and loose with the legal requirements. Um, and we are taking that into account and putting that evidence in front of federal judges. And the last few weeks have been really bad weeks in the federal courts here in Illinois for the Trump administration, with the federal judges, at least two federal judges, saying in open court and on the record that the government has lost credibility because it is not um, accurately stating what's happened, and in some cases they are actively misstating what has happened. And that is a huge switch from the normal state of affairs when the government, by and large, is granted a great deal of deference by federal courts. Because ostensibly all of us who are appearing in court as lawyers are officers of the court. We take an oath to the Constitution, um, and we take oaths as lawyers to uphold the law. And lying is not consistent with your oath, and the federal judges are taking that into account.
Can ICE enter schools and retail grocery stores without a judicial warrant?
The answer is it depends um, on what protective measures has been taken. In grocery stores, it's very difficult to argue that those grocery stores are private places. And because they aren't private places, ICE does not need a warrant to enter them. Um, I know that in some neighborhoods in Chicago, um, some small businesses are posting signs in their front window. This is a private place. They are keeping the doors locked, and they are only opening the doors for known customers. So that's one way I think people are responding. As to schools, um, Chicago Public Schools has taken the position, um, and it's consistent with their practices with respect to the public at large. Nobody can enter into a public school basically without permission. They don't allow the public or even parents to roam around. Um, and what CPS has done is it has established a separate legal set of officers, so that if ICE were to come to a school, the protocol is they cannot be admitted. Um, CPS principal or teacher calls the legal department at CPS, and CPS legal department actually immediately appears, looks to see if there is a judicial warrant, whether it satisfies the particularity requirements, and only then makes a decision about um, whether to admit the person. I think that a private school who takes the position that people can't just come in and roam around is also in a very good legal position to basically say ICE can't enter without a warrant.
Um, we have a question here. It is my understanding that ICE has simply ignored the judge's orders. Um, what accountability is there?
Um, a very good question. And this is where, the rule of law is holding, but sometimes it feels like it's a pretty thin thread that's holding it all together. Um, The answer is we keep going back to court and we keep asking for sanctions. And at a certain point, the courts are going to start sanctioning, and in some cases on the East Coast, individual officers and lawyers for the government that aren't telling the truth. We're sort of in that situation where I said at the beginning, sometimes you're in the right. Um, and you just have to fight it out in court. And so, for example, I believe a lawsuit has already been filed by the woman who was shot by ICE in the Brighton Park um, neighborhood in Chicago a couple weeks ago. Um, and it's an excessive force type of lawsuit. And as it winds its way through the courts, if that officer is found to have, basically acted with excessive force or in violation of protocol, he can be held individually accountable. So I think it's important to sort of separate what can happen to the consequences that can be imposed on individual officers who are the ones that are exhibiting the kind of force that is ultimately found by a court to be abusive, um, and the kinds of sanctions that can be entered against an agency, which, basically deal with, findings of contempt, court orders, they violate court orders. Um, and at a certain point, if there's a violation of court orders, the judges can order somebody held in criminal contempt. Unusual, but one of the federal judges on the East Coast basically came very close to that.
I'm an election judge in Illinois. If armed masked men storm the polling place or loiter outside, intimidating voters, what can I do in the moment to preserve the integrity of the voting process?
I would immediately call the Attorney General's office and document. And a good question, and maybe next year at this time we'll be invited back, or our friends over at the Illinois Coalition would be invited back to um, do some voting rights and polling places information. But the Attorney General's office and the Secretary of State's office take very seriously the responsibility to keep polling places safe and open.
Mhm. As a US citizen, if I'm stopped, do I need to produce documents? If so, what documents are acceptable? What happens if my documents are challenged or required to show further proof?
Okay, so if you are a US citizen, you are not required by law to produce documents showing your citizenship. Most of us, myself included, would be very hard pressed to do that. I don't carry my passport around. Um, my birth certificate is locked in a file cabinet. Um, and those are the two the most obvious ways to prove that you're a US citizen, because Illinois driver's licenses do not contain that information. Um, and so, if you are asked by law enforcement to produce proof of citizenship, say, I am a US citizen and I'm not required by law to produce that.
Okay.
And again, this is where it goes like, if God forbid, they say, well, we're just calling you in, you look like you're Hispanic, or, and I know that this has happened. Um, just make it very clear that you're a U.S. citizen, and you object. Um, do not resist physically. And if there are bystanders nearby, or if you're close to, if somebody you know is nearby, ask them to please call your family member and call a lawyer.
All right. I'm a college student. What can I do if I have no authority in my dorm on campus? Also, is ICE allowed on campus since we're a private institution?
Again, it depends on, the protocol and the guidances of your college or university. Um, most colleges and private colleges and universities treat um, like the quad or the grounds as, if not public spaces, sort of quasi-public spaces. People come and go on there, whether they're members of the student body or the faculty. Um, and it's going to be difficult to keep ICE out of those public facilities. Um, if the university has a um, you know, protocol that says all of our classroom buildings are considered, private spaces, you cannot access them without permission, um, then you're in a better position to argue that ICE needs a warrant to enter it. And it doesn't matter that it's a public versus a private institution. It's really a public or a private space. Like if you treat your um, again, using the business metaphor, business is by and large privately owned. If um, the political science building or the fine arts building has sort of a public reception area, that's probably going to be treated as a public space, but classrooms or professors' offices will be treated, you know, um, as as private spaces, again, depending on protocol. With respect to dorms, um, I would check the protocol, and I mean, this is one of those times where you want and need your institution of higher learning to actually be a supportive environment and make it clear by their own protocol or policies um, that they consider student rooms private spaces, even though maybe the do they still have dorm parents? So it's been too long since either I or my kids have been in school. But, maybe the dorm parent, or the RA can enter the room if there's, an indication of a problem. But, people don't just get to barge into people's dorm rooms without invitation, i.e. consent. Um, they're treated as private spaces. But, probably a good idea to ask your university how they treat this.
What are the questions you can ask the officers other than basic warrant, etc.?
One thing that's really important to ask is, am I free to go? So let's because if you're free to go, go. I mean, so let's just say I'm walking down the street, um, and I live in the Albany Park area of Chicago, which actually has a significant Latino or Hispanic population, significant Asian population. So I'm walking down the street, and ICE stops me and says, starts or stops a bunch of people, or maybe I'm stopped because something's happening on the street. Maybe it's an ICE arrest, um, and ICE comes up to me and starts asking me questions of what are you here? What are you doing? Um, whatever. And the first thing I'm going to say is, am I free to go? Um, and if they say yes, I'm probably going to leave or I'm going to back off a little bit. Um, and if I'm not free to go, then those Fifth Amendment rights that I talked about earlier become operative. If they say, what's happening, you're not free to go. What's happening? What are you doing here? Just say, I reserve the right to remain silent. If I'm not free to go, I don't want to talk until um, I have a lawyer present. All the stuff we've all seen on TV a million times. Mm.
So this will be the last question. Sorry if we didn't get to all the questions tonight. We'll share information for ACLU Illinois in the chat. So if your question didn't get answered, you could email them. Okay, so last question is, a bystander documenting federal agent action cannot interfere with that action. Videos I've seen show officers interpreting interference very broadly. Are there any specific actions to avoid or statements that can be made to reiterate our right to document the situation?
Yes, I mean, this is going to be one of those times where sometimes you're going to have to back off more than you want to. Um, what the law says is that you cannot impede an officer, or it's case law, you cannot impede an officer in the execution of his duties. Okay, so um, how are you going to define impede? Surely if you're putting yourself between the person that the officer is trying to detain, that's impeding. Um, if you're standing, you know, right next to the person and the officer says back off, you need to back off. Um, and if you back off 1 feet and he says back off some more, you probably you need to back off some more. I don't want to be tentative about it. If you back off 5 feet, and the officer says, keep moving, um, I I might push back a little bit. But this is where people need to remember that they have to stay as safe as they can and fight about it later because um, and this is where documenting, through notes or narrative is going to be really important because in the ACLU in a case, a long time ago, I mean, like 10 years ago, established the right of citizens under the First Amendment, not citizens, of people under the First Amendment, to document police going about their business. And when police said, you can't do this, back away, um, two federal courts ultimately said, no, this is protected activity. And so even if they object, keep as much record as you can of it. Your eyewitness testimony is helpful also. And it is a protected right that we will ultimately, um, you know, advocate on and ultimately win. And I mean, in some ways, that was one of the things that was at issue in the lawsuit that I've been describing that on the behalf of press and protesters. Basically ICE was saying, well, the press is impeding us, they need to back away. And in some ways it was also indiscriminate, force directed at press. But these are all really important concepts, and the First Amendment does protect this right. So even though you might have to back off, we will fight about this later.
Thanks so much, Colleen.
Thank you very much, Samantha.
Thank you everyone for joining us tonight. A big thank you to Colleen and ACLU Illinois for their partnership on today's event. I hope that Colleen's presentation today was helpful. I also want to flag the community forum resources document that we shared in the chat. This document has some additional information and resources from our office, including a copy of the U.S. Constitution, information on how to apply or renew your U.S. passport that could be used to verify identity and citizenship, reporting property damage or misconduct and where to report for both Homeland Security operations and the National Guard, as well as locating and communicating with a detained individual and more. As the Congresswoman said in her remarks, our office is your office. We're here to help you navigate federal agencies and get help with Medicare, Social Security, IRS cases, immigration services and support, and so much more. For assistance, please call our office at 630-549-2190 or visit underwood.house.gov. I see a lot of familiar names on the call tonight, so I know we have incredible local organizations that are doing crucial rapid response work in our communities represented here tonight. Warehouse Workers for Justice, South Suburban Immigrant Project, the Spanish Community Center, Family Focus Aurora. Thank you for being here. Bye, everybody.
Thank you.